My father-in-law slowly raised his glass during the medical gala, and the entire ballroom quieted down to listen to him. Hundreds of doctors, researchers, and hospital leaders were sitting around the tables, watching the respected surgeon Dr. Hollis Wickham speak. I thought he was about to give a normal speech about medicine and family legacy. Instead, he looked directly at me. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. "This woman," he said while pointing at me in front of everyone, "is the biggest failure our family has ever produced." For a moment, I thought I had heard him wrong. But the room had gone completely silent. Every head turned toward me. Some people looked shocked. Others looked uncomfortable. A few simply stared, waiting to see what would happen next. My face burned with embarrassment. I could feel my hands trembling under the table. I wished I could disappear. What hurt even more was the person sitting beside me. My husband, Ronan Wickham, didn't say a single word. He didn't defend me.
He didn't even look at me.
He just sat there quietly, staring down at the table like nothing had happened. At that moment, I felt completely alone in a room full of powerful people. But what my father-in-law didn't realize was that someone very important was also sitting in that ballroom. Someone who knew the truth about me. Someone who was about to stand up and change the entire situation in a way no one expected. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Dr. Alara Wickham, and the man who just humiliated me in front of an entire room of doctors was not only one of the most respected surgeons in Baltimore. He was also my father-in-law. And sadly, this was not the first time he had treated me like I didn't belong in his family. From the very beginning of my marriage, I knew that my father-in-law, Dr. Hollis Wickham, did not respect me. The Wickham family had a long history in medicine. For decades, their name was known in hospitals across Baltimore. Hollis often talked about how his father had been a famous surgeon and how his grandfather had helped build one of the earliest surgical departments at Johns Hopkins Hospital. In their family, medicine wasn't just a career. It was their identity. When I first met them, I could already feel the difference between us. I didn't grow up in a powerful medical family. I came from a small town in Montana where most people worked regular jobs. My parents were hardworking people, but we never had much money. I earned scholarships, worked late-night shifts, and studied for years just to make it through medical school. For me, becoming a doctor was the result of sacrifice and determination. But to Hollis, that story meant nothing. At family dinners, he would often ask questions that sounded polite, but were actually meant to embarrass me. "Which program did you say you attended again?" he would ask with a small smile. After I answered, he would nod slowly and say things like, Yes, not exactly one of the elite programs." Sometimes he would compare me to Ronan. "My son graduated at the top of his class," he would proudly say to everyone at the table. "Excellence runs in our blood." Those words always felt like they carried another meaning. That excellence didn't run in mine. Every dinner felt like I was being judged. No matter how hard I worked or how many long nights I spent at the hospital, it never seemed to matter. Hollis had already decided who I was in his mind. To him, I wasn't a doctor who had earned her place. I was simply the outsider who married into his family. The hardest part of everything was not just my father-in-law's attitude. It was my husband's silence. At first, I kept telling myself that Ronan Wickham was just trying to keep the peace. His father had always been a strong and dominating personality, and everyone in the family seemed used to it. I thought maybe Ronan had spent his whole life avoiding arguments with him. But as time passed, I started to notice something painful. Ronan never defended me. Whenever Hollis made one of his quiet insults at the dinner table, Ronan would simply take a sip of his drink or change the subject. If Hollis questioned my qualifications or compared my career to Ronan's, my husband would just smile awkwardly and pretend nothing had happened. One night after a particularly uncomfortable dinner, I finally asked him about it while we were driving home. "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked softly. Ronan kept his eyes on the road and sighed. "You know how my father is," he said. "He doesn't mean anything by it." But I knew that wasn't true. Hollis meant every word he said. Still, I tried to be patient. I convinced myself that if I worked harder and proved myself professionally, things would eventually change. Maybe Hollis would start respecting me once he saw my dedication to medicine. So I pushed myself even more at the hospital. Longer shifts, more research, more responsibilities. I thought that if I kept achieving more in my career, one day Hollis would finally see me as someone worthy of his family name. But I didn't realize something important at the time. For people like Hollis Wickham, it was never about what I achieved. In his eyes, I had already failed the moment I married into his family. And unfortunately, the worst humiliation of my life was still waiting for me. A few weeks before the gala, something unexpected happened. During dinner at Hollis's large house in Baltimore, he mentioned the Johns Hopkins Medical Excellence Gala. It was one of the most important events of the year for doctors in the region. Surgeons, researchers, hospital directors, everyone important in medicine would be there. Hollis casually looked toward me across the table. "You should come this year, Alara," he said. For a moment, I was surprised. Hollis rarely included me in anything related to his professional circle. Hearing him invite me felt unusual. Ronan smiled slightly and said, "See? My father wants you there." That small moment made me hopeful. I thought maybe Hollis was finally beginning to accept me. Maybe he had started to see the effort I had been putting into my work at the hospital. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to believe things might improve between us. A few days later, I received the official invitation. It was a formal black tie event. Many doctors would present research and discuss medical progress from the past year. I decided that if I was going to attend, I wanted to do it properly. So I spent the next few weeks preparing carefully. I reviewed my research notes again and again. I organized my presentation slides and practiced explaining my work clearly. I stayed late at the hospital finishing data and making sure everything was accurate. Part of me hoped that if Hollis saw my dedication in front of all those respected doctors, maybe he would finally look at me differently. Maybe that night would be a turning point. When the evening of the gala finally arrived, the ballroom was filled with bright lights, elegant tables, and some of the most respected medical professionals in the state. I walked into that room believing the night might change my life for the better. I had no idea it would become one of the most painful moments I had ever experienced. The ballroom was filled with soft music, quiet conversations, and the sound of glasses clinking. Doctors from different hospitals were greeting each other, sharing stories, and discussing their latest research. The entire place felt important and formal. I sat at the table with Ronan and his father, trying to stay calm. Many well-known physicians were sitting nearby, and I recognized several respected names from medical journals. I reminded myself to stay confident and enjoy the evening. Dinner went smoothly at first. People were laughing, exchanging ideas, and praising different medical achievements. For a short moment, I almost forgot how uncomfortable things usually felt around Hollis. Then, halfway through the dinner, Hollis slowly stood up. Someone handed him a microphone. As one of the most respected surgeons in the room, everyone expected him to say a few words about the hospital's legacy and the future of medicine. Conversation stopped, and the room grew quiet as people turned to listen. At first, his speech sounded normal. He spoke about dedication, discipline, and the importance of family traditions in medicine. He proudly mentioned the Wickham name and how their family had served patients for generations. Then his voice changed slightly. He turned his head and looked directly at me. "And with such a strong medical legacy in our family," he continued, "it is unfortunate that sometimes mistakes happen." A few people in the room shifted in their seats, confused. Then Hollis lifted his glass slightly and pointed toward me. "My son married someone who, unfortunately, will always remain the greatest professional disappointment our family has ever had." The words echoed through the silent ballroom. I felt like the air had been knocked out of my chest. My hands began to shake under the table. Around me, people started whispering quietly. Some looked shocked. Others avoided looking at me entirely. I slowly turned toward Ronan, hoping he would say something. But he just stared down at his plate, completely silent. At that moment, I realized I couldn't stay there any longer. I quietly pushed my chair back, ready to leave the room before my humiliation became even worse. But just as I stood up, something unexpected happened. A chair scraped loudly across the floor. Someone important had just stood up. The sound of the chair sliding across the floor was sharp enough to stop the whispers in the room. People turned their heads toward the front tables where the senior doctors were sitting. A tall man had just stood up, adjusting the sleeve of his suit as he looked across the ballroom. It was Dr. Calder Vance. Almost everyone in the room knew who he was. As the chief of medicine at Johns Hopkins, his reputation carried enormous respect. When he spoke, people listened. The room became completely silent again. Dr. Vance calmly picked up a microphone from the table beside him. His expression was serious, but his voice was steady. "Dr. Wickham," he said while looking directly at Hollis, "I find your statement very interesting." Hollis gave a small polite smile, clearly assuming the chief was about to support him. But Dr. Vance continued. "You just described Dr. Alara Wickham as the biggest professional disappointment in your family." He paused for a moment and slowly looked around the room, making sure everyone was paying attention. "What many people here may not know," he said clearly, "is that Dr. Alara Wickham recently led a research team that helped develop a treatment protocol that saved 3 pediatric patients in the last month." The quiet whispers in the ballroom immediately returned, but this time they sounded different. People were surprised. I stood frozen beside my chair, not sure what was happening. Dr. Vance kept speaking. "In fact," he added, "her work has impressed several departments here at Hopkins." He turned slightly toward me. "And I'm pleased to announce that starting next week, Dr. Alara Wickham will be leading a newly funded research division focusing on advanced pediatric treatment." For a moment, I couldn't even process his words. I hadn't been officially informed yet, but now the entire ballroom was staring at me again. Only this time, their expressions had completely changed. The whispers in the ballroom grew louder as people tried to process what Dr. Calder Vance had just said. Many doctors turned to look at me again, but their expressions were no longer filled with pity or discomfort. Now they looked curious. Some even looked impressed. Across the table, my father-in-law's confident expression slowly disappeared. Dr. Hollis Wickham cleared his throat and forced a small laugh, trying to make the situation seem less serious. "Well," he said into the microphone, "that's certainly surprising news. There must be some misunderstanding." But Dr. Vance didn't smile. He calmly adjusted the microphone in his hand and looked straight at Hollis again. "There is no misunderstanding," he said firmly. The room went quiet again. "Dr. Alara Wickham's research has been under review by several senior physicians at Hopkins for months now. The results have been impressive enough that the hospital board approved funding for a new research program." Several people in the audience nodded. A few doctors even whispered to each other with interest. Then Dr. Vance added something that made the room react even more. "And her work is currently being reviewed by a national medical committee for a potential innovation award later this year." A soft wave of applause started somewhere near the back of the ballroom. Within seconds, more people began clapping. I stood there in shock, barely able to move. I had spent so long feeling invisible and dismissed that I didn't know how to react to this sudden support. But the person who looked the most uncomfortable was Hollis. His face had become pale, and the confident tone he had earlier completely disappeared. For the first time since I had known him, he looked unsure of himself. The same room that had just watched him humiliate me was now quietly watching his reputation begin to crack. And for the first time that night, I realized something important. The situation had completely changed. The gala slowly returned to normal after the applause faded, but the atmosphere in the room had clearly changed. Conversations continued, yet many people kept glancing toward me with curiosity and respect. For the rest of the evening, several doctors came over to introduce themselves. Some congratulated me on my research, while others asked questions about the pediatric treatment program. It felt strange receiving so much attention after the humiliation I had just experienced. Hollis barely spoke for the remainder of the night. When the event finally ended, guests began leaving the ballroom. Ronan and I walked toward the parking area in silence. The cold night air felt heavy between us. After a few moments, Ronan finally spoke. "Alara, I'm sorry about what happened tonight." I stopped walking and looked at him. "What exactly are you sorry for?" I asked quietly. Ronan hesitated before answering. I didn't think my father would take things that far, he said. I knew he was planning to make a joke about your career, but I didn't expect it to become that harsh. For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood him. You knew? I asked. Ronan rubbed the back of his neck, awkwardly. He mentioned it earlier this week, he admitted. I figured it would just be one of his usual comments. I didn't want to create a family argument before the gala. His words felt heavier than the insult itself. That meant Ronan had known his father was going to embarrass me in front of an entire room of doctors, and he had chosen to stay silent anyway. Not because he was surprised, but because avoiding conflict mattered more to him than protecting his wife. Standing there under the streetlights, something inside me finally became clear. My biggest problem had never been my father-in-law. It was the man who had promised to stand beside me but never truly did. For the next few weeks, my life became very busy. After the gala, the hospital officially announced the new pediatric research division. Many doctors reached out to congratulate me, and I began working closely with a new team of specialists. The project required long hours, careful planning, and constant research. But for the first time in a long while, I felt something different. Respect. People listened when I spoke during meetings. My ideas were taken seriously. Instead of feeling like an outsider, I finally felt like I belonged in the medical community I had worked so hard to join. At home, however, things were very different. Ronan tried several times to apologize after the gala. He said he regretted not speaking up and that he never expected the night to turn out the way it did. But every time he spoke, his words sounded more like excuses than real understanding. He kept saying he had only wanted to keep peace in the family. But the truth was already clear to me. Keeping peace had always meant allowing his father to disrespect me. Over the following months, I spent more and more time focusing on my work. The distance between Ronan and me quietly grew. Our conversations became shorter, and the warmth we once shared slowly disappeared. Eventually, we both understood that our marriage had changed in a way that couldn't be repaired. Not long after that realization, we made the difficult decision to separate. There were no loud arguments and no dramatic scenes. Just a quiet understanding that our lives were moving in different directions. 6 months after the gala, I stood on a stage at a national medical conference to receive an award for innovation in pediatric treatment. When reporters asked about my journey, I simply smiled and said something I had learned the hard way. My success came from people who believed in me, not from those who tried to tear me down.
Ronan was not there that day.
And neither was Hollis Whitcomb.